I didn't plan to take down an empire. I planned to go to work on Monday. That was before the letter came. It arrived in my inbox at 6:47 in the morning, sandwiched between a reminder about my diplomatic clearance renewal and an automated news digest about conclave trade agreements. 7 lines. My brother Luca's name was spelled wrong, 1 C instead of 2. The Vaethari Administrative Bureau had killed my brother, and they could not even be bothered to spell his name correctly on the paperwork. I read it 4 times, then I sat very still for a long while. People expect grief to arrive like a storm, loud and immediate and overwhelming. Mine arrived like winter, slow, quiet, and total. I did not cry. I did not throw anything. I opened a new document on my terminal, and I started making a list. Luca was 23 years old. He had a laugh that was too big for any room he was ever in, a habit of sending me voice messages at 2 in the morning because he forgot about time zones, and a genuine, unironic love for alien biology that made everyone around him either smile or roll their eyes. He had gone to Athens 4 on a student research fellowship. He was studying the respiratory systems of low-gravity fauna. He was completely harmless. He was the best person I knew. He filed a report 6 weeks into his placement. He had wandered into a section of the station he was not cleared for, not out of malice, but because Luca's sense of direction was, charitably speaking, catastrophic. What he found there he photographed, documented, and immediately submitted to the station's ethics committee, because that was exactly the kind of person he was. Principled, thorough, unable to look at something wrong and simply walk away. The ethics committee forwarded his report to Vaethari Central Command. Vaethari Central Command classified him as a liability vector. In their legal code, that phrase carries a weight that no translation matrix can fully convey. It means you have seen something that the Vaethari have decided you cannot be permitted to have seen. It means they have calculated the cost of managing you against the cost of removing you, and the math has come out in a particular direction. It means they pressed a button in some clean, cold office on some clean, cold station, and my brother stopped existing. I used my diplomatic clearances within 12 hours of receiving the letter. I still had them then. I was still, technically, a junior attaché for the Earth Interstellar Liaison Corps. I pulled Luca's last 90 days of communication logs, his research files, his ethics submission, and everything the station's system had recorded about the section he had stumbled into. What I found had a name, Project Stillwater. I will not describe all of it here, because some things, once fully understood, cannot be unfelt, and I am trying to tell this story without losing the thread of it. What I will say is this. The Vaethari ruling class suffers from a degenerative neural condition called Keth syndrome. It attacks slowly, over decades, and it is almost entirely confined to their aristocratic bloodlines, a consequence of centuries of deliberate genetic narrowing, the kind of thing that happens when a civilization decides that purity matters more than resilience. There is a treatment for Keth syndrome. It requires a specific neurochemical compound, a molecule that the Vaethari biochemists had catalogued and labeled empathogen 7. It is extraordinarily rare in nature. It is not rare in humans. The human limbic system produces it constantly. It is, in many ways, a byproduct of the way we process feeling, our anxiety, our attachment, our grief, our love. All of that emotional activity generates, as a kind of chemical exhaust, the one substance that kept the Vaethari aristocracy alive. They had known this for 30 years. They had built Stillwater to exploit it. They had pulled children from unregistered outer colony settlements, children who had no census record, no legal protection, no one with clearance to ask where they had gone, and they had used them. The reason humanity had been classified as a provisional species, denied full conclave membership, kept politically weak and legally vulnerable, was not because we were dangerous. It was because fully recognized species cannot be harvested. Full membership would have given us protections. So they made sure we never got there. Luca had found one of the collection stations. He had photographed the equipment. He had written a meticulous, heartbreaking 20-page report, complete with species classification notations and ethical framework citations, because he was a scientist, and that was how his mind worked. And they had killed him for it. I closed my laptop, walked to my kitchen, made a cup of coffee, and stood at the window watching the conclave's transit ships drift across the morning sky. I thought about Luca sending me voice messages at 2 in the morning. I thought about his terrible sense of direction. I thought about the fact that his instinct, when he found something terrible, had been to report it through official channels, because he believed the channels existed for exactly that purpose. Then I thought about what I was going to do. I found Severath through a classified archive thread that Luca's research files had pointed toward without quite reaching. He was a vaethari, which surprised me, and then didn't. Every system produces its dissenters, even cold-blooded ones. He had been an archivist for the Conclave's Central Documentation Bureau for 30 years. He had found evidence of Stillwater 2 decades ago and had spent 20 years being too afraid to do anything about it, adding quietly to his hidden file, while the guilt ate him in the precise, methodical way that guilt eats people who know they should have acted sooner. I messaged him once, plainly, without preamble. I told him what I had, what I knew, and what I intended to do. I told him that I did not need him to be brave immediately. I just needed him to decide whether he was willing to be useful. He responded in 4 hours. He sent me everything. Hill came through a referral from a contact I had made during a trade negotiation 2 years prior. She was a Rakathi, 6-limbed and faintly luminescent in low light, with a reputation for moving things across borders that were not supposed to be crossed. She worked for money. I had some. She took the job without asking too many questions, which I appreciated, and then she started asking questions anyway, which I also appreciated, because it meant she was paying attention. At some point, somewhere between the 3rd and 4th month of working together, she stopped being someone I had hired and became something else. She did not have a word for it. I told her the human word. She tried it out experimentally for a few days and then quietly kept it. Admiral Tessia Vance had been forced out of the Earth Diplomatic Corps 11 years prior for what her official file described as a consistent failure to maintain productive deference in negotiations with vaethari representatives. In plain language, she had refused to be condescended to, which in diplomatic circles is apparently a career-ending quality. She had a ship, a mid-range freighter she had modified beyond recognition, and a crew of 14 people who had followed her out of the Corps and never looked back. She was 61 years old, had the posture of someone who had been furious for a very long time, and had learned to hold it neatly. And when I contacted her and explained what I was building, she was quiet for a moment and then said, very simply, "Tell me what you need." We were not an army. We were not even by any conventional measure a threat. We were a xenolinguist, a frightened archivist, a smuggler, a retired admiral, and 14 people with useful skills and nothing particular to lose. The vaethari built their power on information control, so I started there. I spent 2 months constructing the data package. Every document Severath had, every file from Luca's research, every photograph, every record, every chemical analysis report, formatted and translated and legally indexed according to the standards of 11 different conclave species, not human standards, because humans were still provisional, and our complaints carried the legal weight of a politely worded request. I formatted it for the Rakathi courts, for the Methali Trade Arbitration System, for the Solvari Historical Preservation Board, for species who had seats at the table and the standing to use them. Then I did not release it. Instead, I distributed copies of it to 17 separate neutral species archive systems, each one set with an automatic release trigger, on a 72-hour timer. Every 72 hours, I logged in and reset the timers. If I stopped, if I was detained, or silenced, or rendered inert, the timers would run out. 17 packages would release simultaneously into 17 different legal systems. There would be no single point to suppress. There would be no one jurisdiction to quietly suffocate the story within. I was not a weapon. I was a schedule. I arranged the meeting with High Senator Orath Vel through channels that took 6 weeks and a considerable amount of Kell's talent for creative logistics. He agreed to meet because his people had flagged me as a low-priority nuisance who could probably be managed with a conversation and a vague offer. He was the architect of Stillwater. He was also, as Severath's files confirmed, in the middle stages of Keth syndrome. He had more reason than most to want things to stay quiet. I walked into that meeting alone. They scanned me for weapons at the door. I was clean. They checked for a communication device. I had left it with Tessia. I sat down across from the most powerful vaethari in the conclave, and I folded my hands on the table, and I looked at him. He looked back at me the way his kind always looks at ours, like I was a minor curiosity, like my presence was mildly interesting but not concerning, like he was already calculating how quickly this could be resolved and what it would cost. He had never been in a room with someone who had already made peace with every possible outcome. It showed in his posture. He was comfortable. I let him speak first. He offered money. I said no. He offered an accelerated pathway to full conclave membership for humanity. I told him it was never his to offer, and we both knew it. He asked, with the careful neutrality of someone who is used to controlling conversations, what I wanted. I told him plainly. The program ended. Every child on every station released, every collection site shut down, records destroyed, the medical research discontinued. Luca's name cleared and his findings officially recognized, and Orath Vel himself, standing before the full conclave assembly, explaining what Stillwater was and how long it had existed. He told me I was not in a position to make demands. He told me I would not leave the building if I continued this line of conversation. He told me, with the calm certainty of someone who has never had to question whether the world was arranged to protect him, that humans were managed, not negotiated with. I did not raise my voice. I did not move. I told him that I had 17 data packages sitting in neutral archive systems across the conclave. On release timers, I had to reset every 72 hours. I told him that every package was formatted for the legal intake systems of species who had the standing to act on what was in them. I told him that detaining me, or harming me, or making me disappear the way they had made Luca disappear, would not stop the release. It would cause it. He was quiet for a moment. I could see him running the calculation. Then I told him the thing I had come to say. Dying was the most expensive thing I could do, and I had already made sure he would be the one paying. I do not know exactly what a vaethari looks like when they are afraid. Their faces are not built for the expressions I grew up reading. But something shifted in that room, something in the air pressure of the conversation, something in the way he went very still, and I understood that the calculation had come out differently than he had expected. I walked out of the building. Kel was waiting 3 blocks away, bioluminescent markings dimmed to nearly nothing in the daylight, pretending to examine a transit map with the focused intensity of someone who is absolutely not waiting for anything. I did not give Orath Vel the chance to find a solution. I released the packages myself 6 days later, on my own timeline, broadcast through Tessia's ship across every relay node in the sector. I reset the timers one last time, and then I let them run out. And then I hit the manual release myself, because I had decided that waiting for him to act was giving him too much control over the ending. The conclave took 8 months to fully process what had happened. 11 species filed formal grievances, 4 suspended trade agreements. The Rakathi issued a protective recognition declaration for humanity, which stripped the vaethari of jurisdictional authority over human citizens in most of the territories that had ever mattered. Orath Vel resigned. His successor stood before the assembly and delivered a controlled, careful, legally precise confession, because the new vaethari leadership had correctly calculated that surviving a scandal required owning a version of it before someone else owned the whole thing. Project Stillwater was dissolved. 340 children were located across 9 stations and returned. Earth governments built places for the ones who had nothing to return to. Luca's ethics report was officially entered into conclave record. His research was published. His thesis, the one he never finished, was completed by his former professor and dedicated to him, with a footnote that described him as meticulous, principled, and incapable of walking past something wrong without stopping. That part was true. I received a formal apology from the vaethari High Council, 12 pages, technically perfect. It did not mention his name. I read it once, and then I closed it. I still hear his voice messages in my memory sometimes, always late at night, always too loud for whatever hour he had forgotten to calculate. I have not found a way to miss him less. I do not think I am supposed to. Grief is not a problem to be solved. It is the shape of how much someone mattered. I carry his shape with me now, and I think I will carry it for the rest of my life. People ask me sometimes how I did it. I never know how to answer that in a way that feels accurate. The truest thing I can say is this: the vaethari had 3,000 years of practice building systems that controlled things. They were extraordinary at it. They had never needed to account for something that did not care about being controlled. They had looked at humans and seen instability. They had seen excess. They had seen sentiment as a vulnerability. They were right about what we are. They were completely wrong about what it means.